Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Lorandom podcast. I'm your host, Peter Bauman, the editor in chief at Lorandom. And today we have two incredible guests. They are Anne Hirsch and Maya Mann for our Friday podcast episode. And as usual, also, we had another piece of content this week. So this Tuesday, we published an interview with the wonderful multidisciplinary artist Jess Tucker, who examines how contemporary surveillance technology tracks our bodies and also manipulates our minds. But today, our podcast episode is with Maya and Anne. We look at the themes and the topics that are central to the duo's collaboration, specifically the projects Ugly Bitches and Little Darlings, which both explore femininity and masculinity online in the 2020s. I wanted to get their take on how those projects relate to this so-called vibe shift that's happened over the last several years, and just get their in general takes on the extremes of online gender performativity. We also talk about the Solana Avant scene and both points of contact and maybe where they depart with that scene. So we also talk about a lot of other things, and I'm very excited to share. So let's begin. I'm excited for this chat, and yeah, excited for some of the things that we might get into. But yeah, I just would like to know if you could tell us how you met and then how you began working together originally.
So I was a big fan of Anne's, and we met in LA when I was living out there doing my MFA. We became friends after we met and started talking. We started working together because Anne at the time was doing this NFT criticism series online. And I would watch the videos, and she had a video where she said, I really want to see a collection called Ugly Bitches. And I said, that's a really good idea. And then that was it.
Yeah, and she started sending me like all these ideas like of what it could be. And I was like, let's just make this together. I was doing these criticism vlogs, like videos for Outland about NFTs. And the one Maya is referencing was about like women in NFTs. So like World of Women, like all those like really cheesy girl boss projects from the like 2021 era. But I think Maya just knew me from like the work that I had done, and we just have like, you know, when I was in my 20s and 30s, and there was just like a lot of overlap in our mutual interest in terms of girl performativity online and like what that means. And so we had a lot of areas of overlap.
Yeah, I'd seen Anne's work before, like her piece Scandalicious, her performance work on YouTube, and it was really formative for me when I was starting out making my own work. So
I'm interested in the main topics. Maybe we can start there, that the work that you decided to make together, that it explores, and you had talked about these like women-centered NFT projects that were around in the 2020s and how your work was in some ways a response to them. Like, I wonder if we could talk about that. Like, what was Ugly Bitches, your collaboration, what was it speaking to back then at that time when those projects were popular, but also like popular with celebrities and like seeming to make like millions of dollars? Like what were the how were these projects sort of born in some ways, or responding to those projects?
Yeah, I think like first of all, like women in NFTs is already like a very small niche thing. There wasn't that many of them generally, but then there was like a whole slate of projects that were like, no, women have to be in crypto and NFTs too, and we're gonna like girl boss this and lean in. But all the projects were just like images of like beautiful women or like illustrations of like beautiful women. And that was like kind of it. And then like also when you looked like deeper into a lot of these projects, it was like teams of men mostly. So it was kind of like, all right, is this really? And by women for women. Although some of them were, but they just didn't have a lot of depth to them. And then like if you went deeper down the rabbit hole, which like I do in the original video for Owlland, there's like women with weapons. There's like Asian women. It was like celebrating like all kinds of like Asian women and just like, just all these beautiful images of these Asian women. So it's like, how much is this really like for women, or is it just like women that are for men, basically? Like an NFT project of women for men. So the idea was like with Ugly Bitches was to counteract that and be like, actually, like women are like ugly and they like suck. And that's like just how we are. And that like is what it is. Like I was just tired of like the idealization of women. Because I think that's like very limiting. The idea behind Ugly Bitches was just like a more realistic depiction of like who women are. Flaws and all.
Yeah, I think we were both really exhausted by the kind of girl boss-esque rhetoric that was also popular and is popular to an extent outside of NFTs, but in NFTs it felt so concentrated in one note. Ugly Bitches was our run for freedom.
I mean, so it's exploring ideas of femininity, and then Little Darlings it seems to be exploring kind of similar things with masculinity. And these projects have come to pass during this interesting time period and sort of, I don't know, socioeconomic, political, like history, like this sort of vibe shift that's happening, and so-called vibe shift that I suppose is happening. I just wonder how your work is sort of registering or commenting on this, or how you see this vibe shift.
We're both really interested in culture and pop culture and like to observe through our work what is happening in both of the projects. Ugly Bitches and Little Darlings kind of zoom in on extremes of gender performance online that we were really fascinated by. And like with Ugly Bitches, for example, we took the text that's featured in Ugly Bitches or comments from like, hot influencer Instagram profiles like Kylie Jenner, Addison Rae, and looking at the comment section and kind of seeing the way that people are talking about this archetype character in pop culture that exists on Instagram. And then similarly with Little Darlings, that we were kind of interested in, okay, what is the extreme of masculinity online right now, which has, I think, very serious political implications. I mean, like across the board for the way that gender is performed online. But with Little Darlings, we had a pretty, both technically and visually, we had a really different approach from Ugly Bitches, because the culture had a lot of parallels in terms of like, both of the projects are kind of about aspiring to a very specific ideal mode of performing a like gender extreme. So, and with Little Darlings, what we found is kind of going down these rabbit holes online of our video work, Hustle, Grind, Gain, Success, that compiles a lot of TikToks, that adds together a lot of TikToks from different that are really targeted at like a young male audience, with like men in the gym and on podcasts giving advice, that type of thing. We found that the language was so absurd, and the kind of lifestyle that was encouraged was so extreme and isolating with Little Darlings. And we really wanted to draw that out. But I think in both projects, there's kind of this like drawing out of all of these different examples of these cultures, like the Instagram comments, or with Little Darlings, their comments on like male kind of influencer Instagrams. And then asking people to really look at what this means, even looking at one or two comments together, I think starts to paint a picture of something very serious about culture right now and gender online. So yeah, I think with both of those, we wanted to really draw attention to what was happening.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, with the increasing like wealth inequality, you have this like hustle culture, which has like dominated online. It's like we're in like peak like bootstrapping times, and it's like nothing's wrong with the world. The problem is you. So I think like that's been this vibe shift, and I think both projects try to capture that. Both projects kind of show like both Ugly Bitches and Little Darlings. They're like trying so hard to be this thing, but they're just like failing miserably, and you just like see that failure on them.
Yeah, and I think with Little Darlings, especially watching so many of the TikToks that are about like have this rhetoric about like you need to hustle, grind, gain success. It's so much pressure and like agency that's put on to that's kind of implied in the way that people are talking about how you should live your life. And yeah, like Anne is saying, it's just ignoring a lot of larger like structural factors that affect the way that you are able to live your life. So doing that project for me was really enlightening because I think both Anne and I have, make a lot of work about gender and performance online, but like especially, about the performance of femininity. And I think that was like a real like deviation, but also for me, like, but also it kind of resonated with a lot of what we're both interested in terms of performing femininity.
Yeah,
too.
I think we've also seen this like interesting feminization of men online, which has been, interesting to watch because like originally first no one could like show themselves online. That was like so embarrassing. And like women could show themselves online. And then like slowly, okay, now men can show themselves online and it's normal. And I was thinking about this like meme on TikTok where it was like it's like shows men at the club and they're all standing like on the tables and all the women are mad. They're like, the women should be like standing at the tables, but the men just go to the club to like peacock. Like, so there's this interesting like switch where like men now more want to like peacock and like show themselves off that I don't think existed before.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's what was also surprising watching all of these TikToks is it felt like a new genre of content for men to be making. And I've always felt like most of the straight men in my life are very uncomfortable with posting online. And I think that's because they don't have the experience of living and feeling so much as, non-men. People, you're kind of conditioned to always feel like you're watching yourself in some way. And then posting on the internet is kind of like an extension of that feeling. But I think for a lot of straight men in my life, it's very new feeling, which makes it very uncomfortable. But I do think that there is this whole evolution of this side of culture where, yeah, now men want to be able to participate in that way a little bit more. But it's also interesting because like in NFTs and crypto specifically, there's like, there's a lot of men, but people don't like to it's like a culture that really runs on this kind of like cloak of anonymity too, which I think makes so many people a lot more comfortable participating.
Yeah, it's interesting that your work teases out these questions about masculinity and femininity and how in some ways they're becoming more extreme and kind of more polarized themselves, and then as people are also becoming in real life sort of more isolated, which is something that we mentioned, but at the same time they're also blending and becoming confused with one another, and then as with people being able to be anonymous or pseudonymous online, and then it's unknown, and so yeah, like the online is offering these different spaces for people to perform I'm also interested in how, and maybe we did talk about this already, but like how Ugly Bitches and Little Darlings, I guess, specifically how they orbit these like the false promises that are pushed at women and men online. And is it as simple as like if these camps are getting further and further from each other, that that's a bad thing, and that if the more that they blend, that that's a better thing? Is that how you see it, or I don't know, how do you think about that?
I don't think it's such a distinct dichotomy, like, oh, it's good or it's bad. I think that it kind of in all directions, it's very constraining to have these certain ideas infiltrating your mind about how you should move through your life and perform online and perform your gender identity online. And I think, I mean, something both Anne and I talked about a lot when we were making the project was, like, people, as 2025, we acknowledge that gender is like very much a performance and a spectrum and fluid, but also with that kind of more and more people acknowledging that at the same time, there's like the extremes of gender performance online with masculinity and femininity are like kind of like moving apart and like doubling down into these forms of subculture that are really intense. And I think it's very mentally polluting to have these ideas about like that you should be participating in the world in a certain way or thinking about yourself in a certain way because of your gender identity. And I think Anne and I also kind of share a sense of humor, which I think comes through in the work as well. And I don't know, I always have this feeling when I'm looking at, like when we're like the projects we were talking about before, that Ugly Bitches was somewhat inspired by, that are about like women are beautiful, like yay, women in different colors, like purple women. Like it's like it's kind of like be for real. Like it's just sometimes like, okay, like let's escape this. And but I think it's complicated because it's not a neat narrative. And I think because obviously, it's not all bad to celebrate women or whatever, but like, I think it's the reaction we have to that specific brand of feminism is kind of nuanced, but it's also then like hard to make grand statements of like, oh, it's better for things to move in this way or that way. But I think Ugly Bitches and Little Darlings are kind of acknowledging that there are these imposed extremes and we want to free people from them with our Ugly Bitches.
Yeah, and I think that like for me, the whole thing of like all women are beautiful, like automatically implies that beauty is the most important feature for a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So like I found that very frustrating as well.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned that humor is an important element. By adding humor, you're making it more approachable, and some of these you're making, I guess, like especially with like Little Darlings, the bro culture, by parodying it and sensationalizing it, it brings attention to it as something that can be analyzed and something that can be approached objectively, away from some of its original context. And I also wonder how AI helped you achieve that, or AI helped you serve what you're trying to achieve artistically with those two works, because that's another thing that they both have in common, as opposed to being kind of complementarily making these nuanced points about masculinity and femininity. They both also use AI. And I just wondered if you could talk about that decision to use AI, and then how GANs specifically they serve the concept of the work, and then why you thought it was essential to use AI in both works.
Yeah, so I think with Ugly Bitches, that's a GAN that we use, which we trained on all these images of all different kinds of dolls. And I think what a GAN literally is doing is it's like taking all this data and trying to like output like what it thinks the data is. But like you know, the GAN is a bit of like an older technology. So what the GAN ended up spitting out was this like failure of like recreating these beautiful dolls. It spit out this just like Frankenstein of dolls. I felt like that was like very akin to like the process of being a woman. You're taking in all this data of like what it means to be a woman, and then you're spitting back out your own image, but like a lot of times you just end up coming up short, or you fail in some way, or you feel that you fail in some way. I think all women probably feel that even if they are succeeding. And then Little Darlings, we trained a model on a lot of action figures, and then we took what came out. We took the figures that came out and put that into Midjourney to give them like an action. So I think that was very different, like, and similar to like, you know, the hustle culture is like you're training yourself on these like images of other men. So I think that process is like akin to what we did with the model training.
Yeah, and when we were talking about it, working on both, we really wanted the method of training each of the models to kind of reflect conceptually what we wanted to communicate with the work. Like Anna's saying, the kind of performance, the inherent performance quality embedded in the process of training an AI model, like it's trying to replicate something that it's already seen, is very reminiscent of gender performance to us. And so it was great to do it with Ugly Bitches using the GAN, because the aesthetics of the GAN make the dolls that come out look like really kind of fucked up. And that really, I think, served the visual component of Ugly Bitches really well. But with Little Darlings, we took like such a different approach, using like a Stable Diffusion model and then like filtering that through Midjourney. And so they have like a much shinier, the images have a much shinier quality to them, which also felt very relevant to the commentary we wanted to be making about this specific aspect of masculine culture online. And so it was interesting doing Little Darlings like as this sequel to Ugly Bitches, because we kind of had a format that we felt worked really well conceptually with Ugly Bitches, but then figuring out how to kind of like take that format but warp it in a way to make it something newer for Little Darlings was a good constraint and challenge.
Yeah, and I think whereas like Ugly Bitches seemed to be kind of about like failure, Little Darlings was about extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Like those figures look just like to the max crazy, like to the max masculine. They're doing all this crazy stuff, you know?
Yeah, and for Ugly Bitches, we changed all of the comments where we replaced adjectives that were like beautiful, gorgeous with ugly, and then words like woman and babe with bitch. And then with Little Darlings, we were taking the comments from these male hustle influencers' Instagram comment sections, but the comments were so insane on their own and so like powerful. Honestly, we were debating about changing them in some way, but felt ultimately they were so special left alone, so we didn't alter the comments in Little Darlings, which gives them I think the right emotional quality with the images.
Yeah, I was interested in that, how the aesthetics are clearer, and so is the text with Little Darlings, and yeah, the intentionality involved with that, or whether that was like, oh, it just happened to be that it was because it was about a year later, right? So maybe like the GAN model was just more sophisticated at the time or something. But that's interesting that yeah, it was to highlight sort of and to maybe depict more precisely the kind of the extremes of male masculine culture that you're observing at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's already, looking back at Ugly Bitches, which came out in January of 2023, which is not that long ago, the GAN aesthetics look super vintage now in terms of like AI aesthetics. I think that was definitely something that we took into consideration making Little Darlings, because the way that AI-based visual culture had shifted over the year, it gave a very different read on a GAN-based image versus something like a diffusion based image. So they're kind of like markers in time also.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm also really interested in, especially with you two, is your relationship to this the Yechilang sort of scene, or this like this avant schizo collage Solana scene that is also called gay NFT. I'm assuming you guys are all friends, right? I know Maya. I mean, you've showed together in shows, like with shows that you hosted and curated, right, Maya? And yeah, I know, and that you've tweeted about it quite a lot, and I think you're a collector, and maybe you're both collectors, or I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of points, or there are many points of contact, and yeah, I'm just curious. What are some of those points of contact, and then also where might you part ways?
Yeah, I would say I'm like an admirer of the scene, but like I don't really see myself as being part of it beyond being a collector. What they're doing, I think, is really cool, but it's just it's not like what I do. So I don't feel like, oh, I want to be a part of that. I'm like, that's cool. Like you keep doing like what you're doing. I'm just gonna keep doing like what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, I feel similarly. Like I'm a fan and friends with some of the artists. And yeah, when I was running my curatorial project Heart out of my studio here, I showed some of the artists here, which was really fun. And so yeah, I feel like also a fan, but I haven't released a project directly into that universe, and so I'm an admirer and a fan, and I think I relate a lot to the very collage based aesthetics and kind of like formal qualities of what they do, what a lot of the projects do. I think a point of departure for me is that in a lot of my work, which I think, to an extent, Ugly Bitches and Little Darlings is a little bit of an exception, and I think like the projects that I've done that are visually closest to that world, but a lot of what I do, I'm really interested in working with custom software and writing my own code and doing that type of thing. And I'm really interested in the way that like code executes and performs in a work. And I think that's less of a core element of what's kind of happening in that scene, which I think is really like, it's very visual culture, and less concerned with the software element. So I think that's something that like for me, I prioritize a lot in my practice, but yeah, I'm a fan.
Some people have said to me that they think Ugly Bitches is a proto-gay project.
Proto-gay project.
So I'm like, yeah, like maybe. But I do think, I think that we are like influenced a lot by each other in ways like my Annie project. I think even though that, the gay scene is like primarily they're using hash lips and just like a shit ton of layers or whatever. And the Annie project, like I was doing layering, but all with AI. And the like outputs were more like emotional and like sentimental. So I think the feeling and the vibe was meant to be different, but like I definitely borrowed this idea of like different layers.
Yeah, and I think something else that I'm just thinking about now is that a lot of the work that's coming out of the gay NFT scene, I feel looks maybe the most similar or like the most related to contemporary internet culture, like outside of art. Like visually, I think it reflects a lot of what I associate with internet culture very specifically, which I'm interested in the work that I make. But I think, that's something that I find that a lot of what people would say is like more of the generative art scene often is less interested in mimicking aesthetics of internet culture. And so that's a departure that I feel from a lot of the generative art scene, and then that's something that I feel very aligned with in terms of like the work that's coming out of the gay NFT scene. I think captures something like hyper contemporary about visual culture and is reflecting that through the collections that they put out, that I feel like is missing a little bit in other arenas. So
Yeah, I think that term schizo
yeah,
is really significant for this scene, because I think really what they're trying to do is capture that crazy feeling we all feel when we go online and we're bombarded by so many different like images and stuff, and that's what those NFTs capture really well. And I think that's what they're like interested in, this barrage of content.
Yeah, and I think there's an additional challenge for code to capture that, where it's easier for it to convey, I guess, like abstract geometric concepts. It seems like with math, whereas like a lot of the gay NFT scene doesn't. A lot of those guys don't really know how to code, and so they skip that, and so it becomes more about they're almost like scavengers online for visuals. And I think what they literally do is like go on like Pinterest and Instagram and like find all these visuals and create a database, and then put that into a blender on Hashlips, and yeah, to varying degrees of success, come up with these snapshots of that barrage of culture and what it's like to be online. But so I think like just the method itself lends itself to being able to do that a bit better with their tools, it seems.
yeah, but it's funny whenever I've never used Hashlips, but whenever I hear people talk about it, I'm like, I think you could like, it's just layering images is my impression, and it's like in terms of software, like a super simple piece of software. And so in a way I feel like, well, I really love being able to be like closer to the code, and I feel like, oh, like if you are able to be on the level of like of the software, even if you want to have something like Hashlips, like you could kind of unlock a lot of exciting potential with it. But I think it's interesting, like, to get in the weeds a little bit, like when thinking through generative, the way that people are usually writing code to produce what many people, term generative art now. Often people are using graphics libraries. So it's like a very canvas-based approach that I think, like you're saying, does really lend itself to kind of geometric or abstract like work. Also, if you're, rather than using canvas, if you're interested in interfacing with the DOM, like the web page, and not using a graphics library, like that gives you the ability to make a lot of, like, I think visually that lends itself even a bit more to make something that has a very inherent like internet native quality to it. So
I think also with the gay scene, like if you want to be part of it, you have to be like online constantly and like in all these like crazy group chats.
yeah,
I just like don't have the time for that.
yeah,
That's like a huge barrier to entry.
yeah, same, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I might be in a couple of those group chats, and yeah, I feel like I don't always have the time to respond to them, or yeah, very rarely. One thing that is interesting about that scene that I feel like maybe your work is responding to, and I'd like to know, is it consciously or maybe unconsciously, or yeah, maybe just not at all, is that like that scene seems to be, everything is very intentionally vague and unserious, and you never know if it's if it means what it's saying, or if there's a wink. It's kind of that Poe's law that you never know if what's being said online is sincere. But then I think Maya, especially like your work, like with Heart that you curated, it seems to respond to that by deliberately being a bit more sincere. And I'm just wondering, to what extent do you see those things as related?
Yeah, I think that a lot of, quote unquote scenes, or like kind of collectives oriented around internet culture in the past or that exist now, that kind of have like, and you know, a lot of artists are part of and have a perspective on art. Many have felt very boy coded and boy oriented to me, which is like, you know, a generalization, but I think it's also like there's a real truth about the attitude that's like embedded in the fabric of a certain community or like the visual communication of a group. And with Heart, my project that I ran out of my studio, it was, you know, a pretty direct translation of what I'm interested in. So it's which I'm really interested in feminine aesthetics online and you know, feminine online culture. But at the same time, I think also and I think only in retrospect am I able to fully articulate this, but I was feeling very exhausted by this kind of adoption of an attitude of irony that I think is really like endemic to being online. And like I do resonate with a lot, but I think also I really work in my life like zoomed out, like just to really fight that kind of cynicism that I tend toward a bit. And what I am most excited about in the world and what I care most about is art and art on and about the internet. And I really wanted with Heart for that to earnestly come through in the way that everything was communicated. And I think I found like the most rewarding part of being an artist for me is being a fan and like being excited about what other artists are making and talking to them about what they're making. And Heart was like a real vehicle for that. And so I wanted it to feel curatorially like a really strong program. Like I wanted to show artists work that I only felt was really strong and that I was excited about. But at the same time, I wanted the attitude to feel celebratory. And so I think that's why it kind of came through the way that it did. And I'm saying all of this because I'm kind of thinking about it in retrospect. In the moment, it was very like fast and loose. I was doing like an event a week. It was crazy. And the communication was it just came out very seamlessly without a lot of thought because there was no time to think about anything. But now that's what I think about it.
Yeah. And Anne, like, I guess a similar question with you and Annie, and I guess you did already touch on it, but do you see that as a response to as a bit of actual sincerity and is that a response to some of those same masculine coded like insincerity and cynicism that is online a lot?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in a term that I'm making up called ironic sincerity, which is like basically something that like seems ironic but is actually very sincere. So like, for example, in my Instagram profile it says I'm like a prayer warrior, which like probably seems like, oh, I'm making fun of like prayer warriors, and like I am, but like I also am a prayer warrior. Like I believe in the power of prayer and like, you know, spirituality and all this stuff. I think like Annie is along those same lines. There's like a saccharine emotionality to it that is almost ironic, but also is for me is very sincere. Like I would like watch the website that I had made and I would like cry, be like, this is so sad. just like just like thinking about being a tween, or you know, things that I had those big feelings that I had experienced at that time, like recognizing that those feelings are like the teenage girl feelings are like insane, but also they're very, very real. And I think the gay scene does kind of do the ironic sincerity as well. Like I do, like it's not all like, I mean, it is a lot of jokes, but they are very like serious and sincere, I think too.
No, I agree. And I think talking to the artists who are in that world, there's like a true love for what they do and for the group of artists that are involved. And that is like the best. And I think also I relate a lot to this newly coined term, ironic sincerity. But like, especially even going back to us talking about ugly bitches and little darlings, like in my own work, I always have this fear of like being pulled in two directions with people reading my work. One is that people think, oh, you're making fun of this aspect of culture and you're above it. And you're saying, you know, you're smart and they're dumb. And that's totally not at all how I feel. And that read can be very frustrating. And then the other read is that, oh, you're totally part of this culture and you're not being critical of it and like you're dumb. And so I those are both much neater narratives than the truth, which is the truth is somewhere in between. And that's why I make work about it, because it feels complicated and it's confusing to me. And the work is about working through that in my own mind and in my own practice. And so I think the idea of ironic sincerity kind of captures that, because like it's intentionally ambiguous and you're not adopting like one end of the spectrum or the other. And I think that comes through in a lot of the work that we're talking about.
Yeah, and it kind of in a cheesy way, you're also like leaving it up to the audience to maybe decide or to also internalize continuously that ambiguity. But yeah, so and like that reminded me like what you were saying about Annie, and I've read it too. Like it's very honest and emotionally raw work about a time. I mean, this is even preteen, but about that kind of coming of age time. But I what's funny is I think, or what's fascinating is I think that some of the gay NFT projects that are most successful deal with almost that exact same thing. Like Drafella I wrote an article about how it was like a coming of age story, and like there's a lot of raw emotion and a lot of angst and teen like angst in that project. But yeah, it's from a very male coming of age story. I think and yeah, both projects really highlight those different perspectives. Well, I guess like, are you working on anything together now? Is maybe the first question. So I know you've done a few things in 2025. Yeah, are you working on anything together now, or is there anything that you have immediately coming up, or anything for 2026 that you want to talk about?
We are in conversation about
Okay.
expanding the Ugly Bitches universe.
Yes, it was always, well, in my mind it's been a trilogy for a long time. So we're just starting on the final iteration, like starting researching how we're going to do it. Yeah, so that's exciting, but I feel like this is still a long, we're not close to release.
We can't say too much. Because we don't.
I was say, but Maya, you have a show coming up.
Yes, I have a show opening next week.
Star Quest, is that right?
Star Quest, yes. I'm super excited to share this work. I've been working on it for a really long time, and it's the first like larger AI-based work that I've done by myself. Really most of the AI work has been the work that I've done with Anne. And so it's an AI video based work, and it consists of a data set of 111 AI generated scenes that focus on competition dance culture in America, specifically kind of focused on Dance Moms, the reality TV show, if you're familiar, that I watched many years ago. And I also grew up as a competition dancer for all of my childhood, basically. And so
Mhm.
it's very also autobiographical. And I think making this work has been psychologically like very revealing for me and challenging. But for me, this making StarQuest has really been a process of kind of better understanding so much of the root of my interests in performance online in my arts practice. And I previously, the first NFT I ever made was on FeroFile, and FeroFile's very first exhibition ever called Social Codes. And it was kind of the last project that previously to that, I've been doing a lot of work with dance and code, like using my own body and like doing image and video analysis. And I think that piece, Can I Go Where You Go, which was on FeroFile, was the kind of last project that I really did that was so overtly dance specific. You know, this project is coming out over 4 years later. And I think I've kind of moved through a lot of phases in my practice and kind of reoriented around what specifically about performance that I'm interested in. And StarQuest kind of embodies like everything that I've been interested in about technology and performance that's come through in all my other work. But I'm kind of returning to dance, which, yeah, feels significant for me. So I'm excited about it and I'm nervous. So, yeah.
I'm excited.
No, that sounds very exciting. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, and did you want to, are you working on anything, or what can you tell us about what you're working on or what you have coming up?
I'll probably do one project in 2026. As I'm like a one project a year person. So like I'll probably do another AI related project in 2026. But you know, I don't put pressure on myself.
Wait, was Annie was this year, right?
Yeah, it was 2025. So 2025 completed.
And you did too. Kind of.
The group show is like
yeah.
When I say one project, I mean like one like solo.
We're on the edge of our seats. You're like Lord.
Yeah.
But a more frequent cadence.
So we'll see. I want to do something like maybe a little darker. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, looking forward to what you have coming up and to that project. Yeah, thank you so much for the chat.
Thank you. They're really fun questions. I feel like you have such a good perspective and like overview on a lot of different parts of the NFT scene. And I feel like the questions, yeah, were great and fun to talk about. So it's nice to see you make all these kind of like links.
Well, no, thank you. And yeah, I've been wanting to talk to both of you for a while. I mean, yeah, Maya, we've talked a couple times before, but and really nice to kind of get to chat officially here. And yeah, I hope we can again soon. Maybe when this third of the trilogy comes out, maybe we can chat again.
Yeah.
Yeah, once we're closer to that being realized.
Yeah, we'll keep you in the loop.
Yes, please. Okay, amazing. Well, yeah, thank you so much. And
thank you.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. Bye. Take care.
Bye.